Yes, hello, good evening. My name is Anne-Marie Melster. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Artport Making Waves. We are a hybrid arts organization, a curatorial collective, which we founded in 2005. And since then, we have been working with hundreds of, or we have delivered hundreds of art, climate change, ocean protection projects worldwide, collaborating with the United Nations, several organizations in that framework, governments, etc., always focused at the intersection of art, science, and education. And me personally, I'm an interdisciplinary curator linking the different fields to speak about ocean protection and climate change and to find solutions together with our partners and specifically on a grassroots level. I would like to thank IOC UNESCO and the German government, the BMBF, for the invitation to be part of the UN Decade Laboratories, the first series called Inspiring and Engaging Ocean, and for the opportunity to speak about our project We Are Ocean Vancouver. And actually today it's all about Toitonatsi's Wyss. She is our commissioned, one of the two commissioned artists for We Are Ocean Vancouver, which is an interactive journey created by Artport Making Waves and commissioned by the Vancouver Biennale. Thanks to the Vancouver Biennale again for this opportunity. And delivered by the two Vancouver artists, Toitonatsi's Wyss and Olivier Salvat, where students of British Columbia reflected on the effects of climate change on the ocean and how this is affecting the ecosystems and the indigenous culture of the land of the Squamish. You will correct me with the pronunciation, Cs, the Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam First Nations through activities based on the First People principles of learning and on STEAM. And STEAM is the abbreviation for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics principles. So we started to work on the project in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, and then obviously the pandemic and the new conditions forced us to transform the project into a hybrid format, which the artists did in a fantastic way. And we had then at the end 3 different phases. The first one was the transformed physical workshop into an app. So Cis and Olivier, they created the We Are Ocean app, where kids were learning through several podcasts, which were filmed in the areas around Vancouver, to learn more about the interconnection of land and ocean and Vancouver in specific, and also about colonization and decolonization. There were several topics they spoke about. And right now, the We Are Ocean Biennale and Walkannale is happening. This is a special program or a tour which the artists created for the Vancouver Biennale. They have a specific program in summer where they invite people to bike and to walk through Vancouver, and Cis and Ollie, they created a specific tour. So this is happening. To our listeners in Vancouver, you can still join that. Go through the website of the Vancouver Biennale and learn more about this. This is happening all over the summer. And the third phase is going to be a publication about ancestral medicinal plants and ocean protection, which we are going to work on together with Cis. And why do we do this today? We wanted to turn around the teaching process. So we didn't want the curator to teach like it's usually the case, but we wanted the artist to teach the curator. Also because the curator is very curious to learn more about ancestral knowledge, traditional knowledge of Cis, of course, and of the communities in British Columbia. And so Cis with Ocean Botany private lesson brings the ocean of British Columbia, which is in Canada on the west coast, obviously, to me, the curator, teaching me all about the interconnection of medicinal plants of British Columbia and their impact on ocean health. So it's really about the impact. So who is Toitonatsi's Wyss? I'm going to read this biography because there is so much content inside. Toitonat, Cis Wyss is Squamish, Stolo, Kanaka Maoli. You will repeat that maybe with the right pronunciation, Cis. Irish Métis and Swiss multimedia artist, ethnobotanist, independent curator, educator, and activist based in Vancouver. She is intensely engaged with the community and the public. She will speak about this later on as well. Her recent work is based on permaculture and coast salish forms as presented through earth mounds, as garden beds, etc. Cease is working on a multi-year land-based work with Dean artist Anne Riley, entitled A Constellation of Remediation, a multi-year project focused on plant remediation in Vancouver. But this might have been accomplished already. Toitonat is Wyss' ancestral name, which means woman who travels by canoe to gather medicines for all people, which is beautiful, I think. Cease interdisciplinary practice encompasses aspects of visual art, fiber arts, ethnobotany, storytelling, and community education, among other interdisciplinary approaches. And she has been working a lot with new media, performance, and interdisciplinary arts for more than 30 years. Yes, as a coast salish weaver, Cease also works with wool and cedar and uses indigenous plants in the dyeing process, which is really interesting. Cease also engages with beekeeping and gardening practices as part of community-led initiatives and as a way to explore aspects of land remediation, the ability of plants to remediate soil that has been contaminated with colonial toxins. And she is also called the indigenous plant diva, which is reflecting all of this and bringing all of this together. And I feel really honored to have you on board of this project. You taught me so much, and it was amazing to work with you and to learn more about your communities and your struggles. We all know a lot about the indigenous struggles over hundreds of years by now. And it was a pleasure also working with you and to continue working with you, obviously. So I will Cease, by the way, is right now joining from Montreal, where she is setting up her installation, her outdoor installation, as part of the Momenta Biennale. And she is taking these 2 hours right now for our lesson away from her installation work. And I hand over to you right now. And really thank you for being available for this. And you can explain more about your procedure and how you're going to develop your lesson today and how the audience can also come on board. As soon as we are going to have more visitors here or participants here on Jitsi being part of our conversation, we can open up also our discussion to the audience. You are always invited to interfere, to come up with questions, etc. So it's really participatory. That's really important for us. And for the ones who are watching us through YouTube and Facebook, you can write your questions into the chat. By the way, here on Jitsi, you have the chat function as well. If you don't want to speak out loud, but to ask your question in the chat, you're most welcome. So I hand over to Cease, and I'm very curious, and I hope I'm going to be a good student.
Awesome. That was so wonderful to hear. Thank you. You're so kind, and a lot of good feelings back to you. So I'm actually going to start by introducing myself in my language, and then I'll go back to English. So Hatsquile Eich Tanoyap, Toits Tanat, Queen Quinchaman, Cis Queen Sna, and Tanatchan Tla Slahan Alchameo, Omishchan Iman Tanatla Stalo, Hawaiian e Swiss, e Irish Métis, an Wanaxton Squallowan, Anhaf and Squallowan Titsits. So is Anhaf is good, it's good feeling. Squallowans, my heart feels good. So it's just sharing that this is a really good day. And my traditional name is Toitstanat, and Cease Wyss. Cease is my nickname. And yeah, there's a bigger part of it, but my bigger introduction gives several generations back, and we usually introduce several of our generations so that people know who we are, and if we're ever speaking to a group of people, there may be people we're related to. And as Anne-Marie just shared with you, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I'm here in Montreal right now with the Momenta Biennale. I'm working with local indigenous artists, Anishinaabe and Mohawk people, predominantly from Ganawage. And so it's like really uplifting, because one of my first, besides my parents and my family, the next teacher that came into my life to teach me about ethnobotany and ecosystems and like really holistic wellness for ourselves and the planet actually was a Mohawk elder. So I really felt good coming here to bring, it's like giving a gift back to that community that has actually, without knowing it, supported me for 3 decades with carrying this knowledge and helping to revive this knowledge in my community. When I was in my late teens into my early 20s, I really wanted to learn ethnobotany and know more about traditional medicines. And I, at that time, just thought herbalism, but it really became about ethnobotany. And ethnobotany is not just the study of plants, but it's indigenous plants, their ecosystems, the humans, and every living creature that interacts with those plants and how they live and how they coexist together. So it's really taken me to other levels. I've predominantly been a media artist for about the same time, 30 years. So I've done both fields of study, and what I've really found is that they very much intertwine and weave into each other's realms. And ethnobotany is the study of the most ancient technology, and media arts is the most recent technology. So it really does gel, and it's actually helped me to put this presentation together today, because I took pretty much all the photos you're going to see. There might be a couple that I borrowed from here and there, but I'd say 99% of the images you're going to see in this presentation came from me and my interactions with the natural world. And as Anne-Marie was saying, I have a multidisciplinary background, and I've become very much involved in using indigenous gardens and transplanting ecosystems, remediating ecosystems, and taking the deeper study of fungus and mushrooms into the realm of my art practice. So I plant gardens predominantly in my territory. This is really big for me, stepping out of my territory, working with other indigenous people. And I can only do that with the local indigenous people here. So I embarked on finding a team to set up and working with the local elders. It's very important to make sure that you don't go into someone else's territory and just start planting things without permission. So the protocols are to ask permission to do this work, to ask elders to give us permission to use a cultural design, and then to take our relatives, the plant relatives, and to plant them. And so they're going to be in raised boxes, and it'll be very amazing. So yeah, watch out for the Momenta Biennale and their promotions. You will have an insight into what that work is. And if any of you are in Montreal in September, check it out. So should I go ahead with the screen sharing now?
Maybe you can explain quickly how you are going to approach all of this, how many lessons we are going to have, or I'm going to have, and how you are going to develop it.
Okay. So I put together I had to do 2 PowerPoints because it was image heavy. So it's divided into 5 sections. And as Anne-Marie was saying, just to talk about 5 lessons, looking at different ways that we understand the human relationship to the natural world, and specifically Indigenous people's relationship with the natural world, and what our life work is with that. Even in a modern colonial mindset, Indigenous people have had to live in, we're not always in that colonial mindset, but we live in the colonies, as we often say. And so we have never severed our relationship with the earth and the waters and the sky. And what I'm hoping is to really give an example of, sorry, I keep hearing sounds. I don't know if some people haven't muted, but maybe people can mute. And so, yeah, so I've divided it into 5 components, and we can do, maybe I'll do a presentation of each, and then we'll do a quiz after each one, and it's a simple quiz, and have some feedback, and we'll move through the 5 sections. And yeah, I hope it's exciting, and I hope this is an interesting afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. For me, it's midday, so it's midday on the Wednesday, I believe. Yeah. Okay, so I will go now into the screen sharing. Oh, there's a question. Maybe I'll just look at that. I don't see it though. Doesn't.
See, it's okay. You can continue. It's just, she said, I'm sorry. I think it was her mic, which was not.
Oh, okay.
Just continue. I handled the questions. You just.
Okay, good. Do this right. Chrome tab. There we go. Okay. So I will see, should go. Okay, so I started off with this image because in talking about the ocean, really wanted to show the great ocean. This is an image that was taken on the shorelines of Hawaii and Oahu, on the lee side of Hawaii, and this or the leeward side. And so this is an elder that I work with. She's in the image, she's about 75. So I think she's about 78 now. It's a few years later. And she is a traditional indigenous high priestess / medicine person. And the work that she does is to spiritually guide people. And her name is the Happy Kahuna Pahia. So the different kahunas all have different personalities, and her work in life is to spread happiness and love and joy. And even her daughter's name is Joy. She has spent her lifetime from very young. She was noticed by other kahunas for her energy and connection to all the elements. And so we have worked on international arts projects together, and I've had her in my territory to meet the Hawaiian relatives of mine and make those connections. So yeah, so I just wanted to really start with that beautiful positive image of how incredible the ocean is and vast, and how important it is to all the work I do and the people that I meet. So I'm going to talk about riparian zones. And riparian zones, as you can see, are that intersection between the waters and lands. And, typically they are seen as being freshwater zones, but they do include saltwater marshes, ocean shorelines, riverbeds, several elements of what the water is. And I really love this photo of this great blue heron that I am blessed to see these birds a lot, and birds have become very important to the work I do, as you'll find through this presentation. And what lives in riparian zones? Well, of course, indigenous plants, birds, and beneficial bugs. They really are the keys. The indigenous plants are the keys to the wellness in these zones, not just for the humans, as this image is an image of cattails with the arrow leaves you see in there are actually called wild potato or wapato, and they're a very important riparian plant. They not only grow in wetlands and close to wetlands in just regular earth, but they were gifted by the spiritual, mythological creatures that have given us all the gifts of the lands and waters. And this was given to two young Katzie women, indigenous women, centuries ago, and they were gifted these plants in order to learn how to grow them, propagate them, and feed their people. And they're also known as wild potato, or as I said, wapato. And all these types of plants grow naturally in these zones because they have all the perfect conditions they require, not only to grow, but to naturally propagate and seed their species. So the wapato, when it has this environment to grow in, even this little pond that is only a foot deep, they can grow leaves that are up to 8 feet tall, and the stems and then the leaves, and they grow well with other wetland plants like the cattail, like you see, but also skunk cabbage and other wetlands plants, water lilies, etc. And so all of these plants that grow in these zones between the shorelines, whether it be river, saltwater marsh, or swamps and bogs, they all of these need to have these perfect conditions. They need, once they have those wet areas, they grow and they start to create the shade. So you get, you get the soil, the sun, the shade, and regular access to water. And these are the keys to healthy riparian zones. And as I was saying, these plants here, the cattails and the wapato, have an ability to naturally keep the water clean. So they're very healing and powerful in their work. And so when you have healthy shorelines, it attracts wild bees and other pollinators and birds of many species. And birds and bees are literally the strongest indicator that all species will survive. And why I say that is that the birds, when there are seeds to eat, they eat them when they fly, and they're, making waste, so to speak. They are spreading seeds. Bees will naturally go and either directly pollinate by climbing in a flower, or what we call buzz pollination. And they will go close to a flower and shake buzz until the pollen falls onto their body, and then they mix it with the next one. And so they continue to do this work. And so with them, they grow those plants. The plants, once they've pollinated from flower to seed, the birds eat them, they spread the seeds. So we need these species. These are indicators, strong indicators of survival for all creatures. So just wanted to really highlight those beautiful creatures, this monarch butterfly, and the other two pictures. The top corner is, a lot of people don't know this, but that's what a ladybug looks like in larvae stage. So that's a ladybug larvae, and the larvae will eat aphids and then eventually turn into the beetle that they are, the ladybug. Then they fly around and they lay eggs, and it continues that cycle. And the same with the butterflies and the bees, they carry pollen wherever they go. So they're very important. Bugs are very important to the survival of these areas. And as I said, I like to really show the land and the water. So you have a nice big picture here of West Coast natural riverbed. You can see how you have the shoreline in the middle there that goes up, and as it gets to a certain point above the water, then the grasses, trees, and herbaceous plants start to grow. And in the immediate, in the bottom corner closest to the next image is a huckleberry bush, and that is probably about 100 or 120-year-old bush, and it might be about 5 foot, like my height, 5'4". And it grows under the canopy, shade canopy of the coniferous trees, the cedar and the firs and some deciduous trees. So all of these together create that riparian zone, and they give the ground around them the ability to grow things. In the top corner, we have a little vireo, a little bird, and it's, you know, again, just signifying that work that the birds do to keep the zones healthy, and tiger tail butterfly down in the corner on the salmonberry leaves. So these are all important elements of a healthy environment. Okay, I'm going to go back to here. So maybe what I do is I stop sharing for in between each one. And then where am I? Here we are. I had to find the other tab, sorry. So my first quiz question. I like this. I like school online. That's really great. So what is a riparian zone? That's my first question.
Yeah, that's something I recently learned. Before this lesson, of course, you talked about that. And right now it's so much clearer to me with the images. It's a wetland zone between the land and the sea or the ocean. Well, it is wetland. It can be sweet water. It can be salt marshes, and it's usually on the ocean shorelines, but also on the river coast. So how do you say on the river?
Riverbed.
Riverbeds, exactly. Yeah. And
I have to think about that too.
And it carries a lot of biodiversity. So this is why this zone is extremely important for the health of the rivers and thus the health of the ocean.
Excellent. Do we hear from anybody else? Does anybody else want to give any feedback on that? Now's your chance.
Ingrid, maybe she.
Don't be shy.
Yeah.
You know.
River margin, Ingrid says. It's the river margin, the riparian zone. Yeah, that's true.
Very much so. Sweet. Any other contenders out there? Maybe as we go along, people will become less shy.
Yeah, exactly. Just continue, because Pietro, he just said that he came late and he just heard about the river margin. He didn't listen to your first lesson.
Well, that's okay. There's 4 more to go. So I'm going to go back to screen sharing, and then there we go. Hold on a sec, and it will share. Okay, so indigenous ethnobotany. So I think it's really important to think about the natural stewards of the lands wherever we go. And for Turtle Island, which is also what North America is called, because if you look at the map, the entire map of North America, it looks like a giant turtle. So many of us believe we are carried on the back of a turtle. So it is intrinsic to the protection and survival of riparian zones that indigenous ethnobotanists are present and aware of the states of these zones, because we are able to notice the indicators of wellness and or distress in these ecosystems and environments. Much like this image that you see on the right, there's actually some children off in the distance. I don't know if you can see it, but I led a group of students this spring on walks and talks along this place called the, I can't remember the name of the slough, but it's a slough, and a slough is another wetland. And you can see that the water is really dark brown and murky, and that everything on the shoreline there is quite dead, and there's many invasive species. So there's so many indicators of distress in this zone, and our work was to look at how we can protect that wetland and support the creatures, the birds and the bees specifically in that zone. And so until then, people had been walking around and they didn't really pay much attention. And after walking with me along here over a period of 6 weeks, they started picking up garbage and learning about indigenous plants that can live in that zone and support the bird and bee habitats that exist there and coexist with humans. And they started to understand just how obvious the signs were that this wetland was in distress. And so without indigenous people, who are the original stewards of the lands and waters, due to our long-term connection with the shorelines and wetlands, we have that vested interest for centuries in the survival of these areas and the care and environmental concerns for time immemorial ahead. And so on the left is a recent image that was taken. And I loved that my friend that took the photo of me had these sparkles on her phone, and I didn't realize it at first. And I was like, are those spirits? Because where I'm standing is actually in what is known as a shell midden. And a shell midden, also known as a shell heap, is where shells have been deposited over several centuries. And so this is an old indigenous village site. And when you think about it, it was really only not even prior to this image, it was only about 70 years earlier that was an active village site. And the image in the corner are shells that are broken up, and the image on top is an eagle's nest. So it gives you an idea again of those indicators of the forest, and you can see how green and lush it is around me, and that the reason it is the shells that are there on the shoreline, which used to be deposited by humans and are now deposited by birds, continue to maintain the wellness of the forest. And so this shell heap is close to a fish hatchery where they're supporting fish, not to be mistaken for fish farms, which breed fish that aren't from the area, whereas this is the hatchery is promoting the wild salmon that are from that area, having safe habitat to start and to grow. And they literally invite children and youth in the neighborhood to come and release the little fingerlings, and they're literally as big as your baby finger when they release these little salmon into the ocean, into the river, and they go down to the ocean. And so I'm a 5-minute walk away at this site where this shell heap is, and in archaeological studies, archaeologists will actually look at aerial maps of areas, and where they see really thick, lush growth, they'll go down and do a dig in that area, and they will dig up shells. And the shells are really what provide that nutrient with the materials from the shells themselves, the meat and flesh inside that starts to decay and then becomes, food for the earth, the worms, the bugs, everything. And it's eagles and ravens, seagulls that especially distribute these shells now through the forest. But at one time, not that long ago, my people and other coastal people, we'd eat our food and we'd throw it in a pile with our biodegradable packaging being the shells, and the shells would feed the earth. So there's a very intrinsic connection between the ocean wellness and the shoreline wellness that is really indicated in this slide. And then I really wanted to show what knowledge transfer means to me. So there is an image on the left that shows my daughter and granddaughter, and also in the top corner. And we have I had to go out and seek this knowledge because it was almost non-existent when I was her age. There was nobody teaching it. And I literally spent the last 30 years helping to teach several ages of people in my community and several others about indigenous ethnobotany and plant knowledge. And so here my granddaughter is learning directly from my daughter the importance of what different plants look like, from the time my granddaughter was born, I was taking her out and making her touch plants the way my daughter is touching the plants there. And then in the top corner, you can see us wearing our cedar headgear. I have a cedar hat. My daughter has a cedar headband, and my granddaughter has a cedar hat, a little one. And she can't wear it anymore. She's 5, so it's a bit too tiny on her. But it shows our connection. These are heirlooms that can be passed on for decades, even centuries, because cedar holds its strength for sometimes centuries if taken care of well. And then the bottom corner is my colleague, Anne Riley. She's a Dene/German artist. And the two of us work on remediation projects. And this is on one of the sites we worked on last year. And it's a tobacco leaf that she's holding. So you can see we grew some big tobacco there. But it really, it's so important for Indigenous people to have this connection to the earth. And because I had to work so hard to learn it, I made a point of teaching my daughter, teaching my granddaughter, teaching anybody. I work with a lot of street entrenched youth, and I bring them out into the forest and I show them plants they can gather when they're needing to stay well. A lot of times they don't have access to health and healthcare, so I teach them what they can eat and what they can use for medicine, and it has really stayed with. I run into youth sometimes 10 to 20 years later that tell me that it changed their lives to learn about ethnobotany and medicines, and they have not only a deeper connection to the earth, but they have a deeper connection to themselves, and they care better for themselves knowing that they can access medicines on their own. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to see if I can do this. And let's go stop. And there we go. Okay, so I hope that was a good little lesson. I really like to show images because I think that it really helps people to, you're not all able to go to Vancouver or the Pacific Northwest coast. So I really hope these photos really help you. So my question is, how do Indigenous ethnobotanists relate to ocean wellness and water wellness?
I think it's what I understood, that it's really a multi-layered journey. That first of all, right now you are rediscovering again. You are reflecting more on your ancestral knowledge, specifically UCs, and working with other colleagues in different fields, and that you discover specific plants and specific areas where you see that the connection to the ocean is very clear. Like, for example, what you showed, the zone, what did you call it? The shell midden, specifically, yeah, where you found in the ground, on the ground, below the surface, massification of shells, and you explained how they came there. They were transported obviously by birds, by different birds like seagulls, eagles, ravens, and those shells, they contain obviously a lot of minerals, and they make the wetlands and those areas where they are found very biodiverse and very healthy. And this is why you have this lush vegetation, like this, in the very green bushes and a lot of berry bushes and the trees, and this is making the soil healthy, and this is making, of course, attracting a lot of insects like bees and butterflies and bugs, which are all very, very important to keep this balance alive. And when the soil of the rivers or around the rivers, close to the rivers, is healthy, the river is healthy. If the river is healthy, the ocean is healthy. So this is what I understood briefly by this interconnection. But maybe there is something else which I missed. There is, I'm sure, Pietro, did you hear something which I missed right now? Oh, maybe sounds. Yeah.
I don't think you missed anything crucial.
I think the salmon hatcheries, or the salmon hatcheries, I think I missed that. But because I always thought the salmon hatcheries, they were more on the ocean coastline, but they are rather in the rivers, or maybe in the deltas. And so you were speaking about the education of kids, that they go to the hatcheries in a specific moment, and they let I forgot the name of the little salmons.
Fingerlings.
Yes, fingerlings.
They're literally the size of your fingers.
And of course, if the hatcheries are healthy, because the area around the wetlands are healthy, then the fingerlings are healthy. And if the fingerlings, which are released to the rivers, go to the sea, which I suppose it is the case, then the oceans are healthy as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
so that little, right where I was standing, was next to one of the tributaries. So there's so many little streams going into the ocean, and I think I was literally about 50 feet away from the ocean in that photo. And so the estuaries, which is the kind of the saltwater marsh area, so it's where they're very rich and unique and biodiverse, like you were saying. And that is because of all of those mixtures of the salt water out in the inlet, and then the fresh water coming down. And that the fact that the salmon can start their lives in a freshwater environment, and that has to be clean, clear, flowing water, free of silt and free of chemicals, and they're very sensitive creatures, but they're also the most powerful creatures on the planet. They provide food and nutrients for everything, not only humans and animals, but for plants. And when they leave and they go to the ocean for 4 years, and then they return, often back within millimeters of where they were born themselves. They're the smartest creatures on the planet, and they live entirely on memory and instinct. And when they return, and after they lay their eggs, they rot on the shorelines and feed that biodiversity. So it's also the shells. So the shell middens themselves are mostly human formed, and animals, birds will drop. I'll be walking in the forest up on a mountain, and there'll be shells, and people are like, where did that come from? I'm like, ravens, eagles, other seabirds, and because they have to drop things, and they'll fly up and they'll look for rocks and drop them, and then come down, and then it opens up, the shells open up, and they eat, and they often throw meat around, and the shells, they break them and leave them and carry on. So all of that is really such an amazing interconnection. And it's, for millions of years before humans existed, all this was going on everywhere in the world. And the sea creatures, all the water creatures and the land creatures had an interconnection, and they still do. And I fiercely advocate and fight for the rights of the salmon, because they are everything to our people. The salmons and the berries are the most important. And we have 7 species in BC of salmon. So, they're all unique, and they're all important to us. So yeah, I hope that was an interesting section too for you all. I hope.
Yes, this is amazing, if I may say something, because, in the West, salmon has become just a mass product. People go to the supermarket and they don't reflect anymore. What does that mean? Where does the salmon come from? Can I actually still eat it? Is it ethical to eat it? And this is something which I find this is why for me personally, it's important to work with you, because you can bring this indigenous knowledge, which is really groundbreaking for people who have been growing up in cities and in artificial surroundings, because nobody goes fishing really to catch a fish in order to eat the fish. most of the people are sports fishers. And we don't go into the forest to pick berries to feed ourselves. We do that maybe because it's nice to do that in summer and fall, and to pick mushrooms, for example. But we don't know actually all the medicinal strengths of all those different species. So this is why, for me, it is important that we spread the word. Of course, we are not the only ones, but I think we have to create a movement around that. So thank you very much. And I think Ingrid also made a comment. She said, yes, salmon are the bones of this West Coast ecosystems.
They are. They really are. Anhach. That means, oh, feels so good. Yeah, I work with amazing matriarchs throughout the indigenous networks, and one of my heroes is Don Morrison from the Secwepemc people, and the Secwepemc Nation is humongous. It's like one of the biggest land bases in BC. It's like 2/3 of the province is the Secwepemc people, and a lot of one of the tributaries that follows down and becomes part of the Columbia River, which is the largest river in Western Canada and the United States. And it, and those salmon journey from these tiny tributaries all the way down through many hurdles and barriers of many kinds, and predators, humans not being the only ones, but seal and otters and whales, everything. And for the southern resident killer whale, the most at-risk species next to the salmon is dying because of the lack of Chinook salmon specifically. And a very sad thing happened a few years ago, where in Seattle, a mother killer whale birthed her baby and it didn't survive. And she carried her baby on her nose for 2 weeks around the Seattle harbor. And people actually said things like, why do you think she's doing that? I'm like, can't you tell? She is angry at humans. This is her protesting. And we can never dismiss how intelligent the species are. Indigenous people believe that we are the children of all creation, and that, that's why some nations have clan systems, and like the killer whale clan, they would believe that they were born of the salmon. The wolf clan would believe they were born of the wolves, and so on. And in the inlet, the image I showed you is Tsleil-Waututh village, and the Tsleil-Waututh in their creation story talk about the time when there were no humans, and that the first human was transformed from a baby wolf, and that no wolf had ever seen a creature like that. And we believe that all over the world, animals witnessed one of their young transform into humans, and that they cared for them. And so we believe that all living creatures have cared for us in every way. And the salmon has especially been one of the most powerful providers of all living things. So they really are the backbone. So I really appreciate that. Are there any more questions or comments before we go to the next one?
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay.
So maybe you just continue, and then we can gather questions later.
Okay. Yeah, we can totally go back over any of this after. Okay, I will screen share my Chrome tab. And there we go. And so birds are, I've mentioned it a bit in my previous sections. So birds as indicators, what roles do birds play in the health and wellness of ecosystems and riparian zones? Just on a footnote, the picture on the left is a nest of baby birds. And this is a nest that was formed on my balcony in a flower pot that I rescued that was thrown out. And I was like, ah, and then I discovered that this migrating bird couple chose my planter as its bed for its babies. So these are little baby purple finches. Many of my friends have said they look like tiny dinosaurs, and we do know that that's evolution right there. They look like little baby pterodactyls right now, but in that picture, but now it's like 2 weeks later and they're probably flying away while I'm here in Montreal. And so I got to watch them actually courting and then bringing the nest materials in, and you can see what a beautiful job they did. I'm starting to see it better now that it's on a bigger screen, and just the wonderment of that life cycle. And down in the top right corner is a wood duck, and I was down at Lost Lagoon, which with our We Are Ocean app, we did a whole section on Lost Lagoon, and it became a saltwater marsh, but it was originally a tidal pool. And then, believe it or not, all the shell middens on Stanley Park were dismantled and turned into roads. And one of the roads was a causeway that cut off this tidal pool when it was filled. So it became an entrapped saltwater marsh that eventually became freshwater. And so it attracts a lot of bird life, and that little wood duck was walking alongside me, and it's just beautiful. It's, of course, I think it's always funny that the males are very flamboyant and the females are more natural to whatever their surroundings are. So the female, even if it was walking next to him, wouldn't have looked as colorful and bright. The bottom image is actually a bit sad. It was a red-winged blackbird that seemed to have somehow passed away in our community garden. So I took a photo of it, and just because I document all this stuff, and shared it with the local bird sanctuary, just to say, hey, let's be on the lookout for birds that aren't surviving. But it was a good indicator to say something wasn't right, because this bird appeared very healthy and it shouldn't have passed away. Then here's some of my favorite creatures, a beautiful bald eagle landing on a shoreline. These are the only pictures in this whole thing that I took from the web, but I just think they're amazing photos. And just to see the majestic energy of that eagle, and it's obviously coming down to get something to eat. It's on a shoreline. It's for indigenous people, eagles represent vision and clarity, and they mate for life. So male and female eagles will get together, and they will be together. Their lives are at least 25 years that they have to live. And the bald eagles don't form their white tail feathers nor their white head until they're 4 years old. And they don't leave their parents until they're over 4 years old. So this is definitely a full-grown eagle. And just the wingspan is about 8 feet across. They're very majestic. They represent communication, but they also, they're in the predator category for other life, but they also can be preyed on mainly by humans. And so with the eagles, when we gather their feathers, when one has passed, we use every part of an eagle, because everything about the eagle is very sacred and very regarded. And in the top right corner, I loved this photo because it's a hummingbird with honeybees getting water. And hummingbirds gather all kinds of plant life when they're setting up their nests, and they will gather lichens, and with their beautiful beak, you see how long it is. They actually are natural weavers, and they'll gather spider webs and use those to sew, to weave together their very tiny little nests to give birth in, and it's just so beautiful. Everything that a hummingbird represents, and they represent movement, flow, and release of energy, because they need so much energy to exist. But as you can see, they love to coexist with other pollinators. And then we have our trickster in the bottom corner, raven, and the raven literally brought light to the world. And the raven, like many tricksters, will always do things in their own interest, but in so doing, they help everyone and everything around them. So the world was dark at one time, and the raven transformed into there are many stories. This is only one of them, by the way. But that raven transformed itself into a hemlock bough. And when it was witnessing a young woman by the river, by the shoreline, gathering fresh water, and when she went to scoop up some water, he turned himself into a little hemlock needle. And so that girl swallowed him. And then in a short time later, she became pregnant. And the raven chose that particular young woman because she was the daughter of a chief with a special box with a special ball of light. And so that raven, being the trickster, wanted that light, and he went and made himself transform into a human. And she gave birth to him within a short time, like maybe 2 weeks after drinking the water. So the chief was very confused. And how did his daughter come to have a baby? And why did this baby come so soon? And then that baby grew very quickly. And at one point, once it was big enough to walk and it could see the box, he made the chief bring the ball of light out to play with him, and he didn't want to let that light go, and the chief would put it away every night. So one night when the raven was old enough, he got out and opened up the box, and he started playing with it. And the other thing to note is that at that time he was born with white feathers. So he took that light out and he was playing with it, and it was so much fun. But the more that it stayed out of the box, the bigger it grew, and it grew out of control, and he couldn't manage it. And he started to lift it up and go through the roof of the longhouse because it was open for the smoke to escape. And it was at that point that the light expanded hugely and lifted up. And in that moment where it expanded hugely, it burnt all of the raven's feathers and it became black. And then he flew away very embarrassed. And then that is how light was brought to the world. So we do believe that each and every one of these birds and creatures has a gift. And even when they do something maybe not in a good intention, it still comes out and does something good for all of us. And so these birds have very strong connections to the ocean. When I was learning to gather cedar bark, there was a big, they call it a conspiracy of ravens instead of a flock. So there was a conspiracy of ravens that led me to the very tree I needed to go to. And when I got to it and walked around, there was nobody had peeled anything. And the ravens were going like clicking sound. And then when I got there, they all stopped, and then I could hear them fly away. And I was like, oh yeah, ravens will always guide people to things, sometimes for their own good. Sometimes they'll guide you to a dead carcass or to an animal so you will kill it and they'll have something to eat. But sometimes they just want to help you. So they are helpers as much as they're tricksters. Yeah. So that's it doesn't seem to be, I don't know if it's frozen. It might be the end of, oh yeah, it's the end of that one. Okay, that's good. I can stop and go back to here. I forgot that I have it in 2 sections. So I was like, why isn't it going forward? It's the end. Okay, so my quiz for this one is, what connections do birds have to the ocean and to the water?
Well, what I understood, I was listening to you, and I remember more the symbolism of the birds you talked about, which is really interesting. You talked about that eagles are representing the vision and communication, and hummingbirds are representing movement and flow and relief of energy. And the raven, of course, represents intelligence and guidance. And what I learned also is that the raven is, for many indigenous peoples, like a holy bird. Like in the Western world, like in Western Europe, for example, the raven rather is something negative. Meanwhile, for indigenous people, it is something positive. And since I learned that, I turned around my mindset regarding my feeling about ravens in general. And I have, well, they are guiding people and human beings, obviously, but they are also connecting to the ocean by their journeys. They are carrying things from the ocean to the land, and the other way around. But maybe I missed a lot of things in between the lines, which you were explaining. So maybe there's somebody who has something more to add than me. Birds are healthy ecosystems indicators. They move seeds and shells. Exactly. That is Ingrid who is pointing out to that. And that's actually, of course, that's the most important part, that they are movers of seeds. So they are really responsible for seed bombing, I would say. Like,
yeah, they are. We love ravens.
Yeah, and I actually love this idea of seed bombing. When you said you didn't know how to pronounce it in the proper way, but for me, it's like, the bird poo is seed bombing. If those birds are vegetarians, obviously, if they are feeding themselves with seeds.
I love that. I'm going to use that from now on. Love it.
Yes, and hummingbirds, obviously, they are pollinators, like bees and insects and butterflies, etc. So yes, and when the biodiversity is kept of the plants, the vegetation in the river and the shorelines, which is obviously kept or conserved by the pollinators and by the birds, then the ocean is healthy. That makes sense.
Yeah, and right now we're calling the hummingbirds the hummingbird warriors, because there was a big section of the Kinder Morgan, or now Canadian, pipeline going through Burnaby in the lower mainland of BC, and there was a whole section of forest there that these guys were going to take down. Then people that have been bird nest watchers have been going around into forests and looking for nests. Just, they love looking for birds, but they're also activists, and they realized that it was nesting season, and specifically for hummingbirds. And so these hummingbirds stopped the pipeline from being worked on this summer. So it's helped humans intervening to protect the birds, to protect the forest where they're nesting, which is really exciting to see more people paying that attention, because we could have wiped out a huge amount of hummingbirds this year if we allowed these trees to come down.
Yeah, and I think this is an important point as well, that we all have to become more activists and don't fear to speak out loud, because I hear that a lot of people are sensitive to what they see, what is happening. A lot of people, of course, not, but many, they are better educated right now when it comes to environmental topics and what is surrounding them directly. It's only that they have to get some tools to act more, not as an activist going on protests and manifestation on the streets, but maybe something which can bring like a construction site on hold by sending a letter or by gathering people online, etc. So I think it's important to speak about this and to make it clear that a hummingbird and a flock of hummingbirds, or like a whole community of hummingbirds, is really important for the balance of a specific spot and place. And it's nice also to look at this this little symbolism, like a hummingbird can stop a whole pipeline. I mean,
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah, and just to note, I found out recently that a flock of hummingbirds is known as a bloom. A bloom of hummingbirds. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
It's so beautiful.
This is a fantastic term to hear, a bloom of hummingbirds. Very poetic. I wanted to say something because last week, me and my colleague of the Barena Bianca collective, we went to the lagoon, to this kind of remote area that is very sheltered. And we saw flamingos, who are like really not the typical animal you imagine from the Venetian lagoon, right? But they are migratory birds, and they are used actually to assess the healthiness of the ecosystem, because they have a very educated palate. So if they want to eat shrimps, they will only come if the conditions of the lagoon are nice. And they used to come for centuries, but they didn't come for many years. And they recently started again coming only to a very specific area of the lagoon, which is very sheltered from big ships and cargoes and so on, because the south is turning into a sea. Actually, it's not a wetland anymore. And they are very important for maintaining the balance of this ecosystem, because they are among the few birds that can scare off seagulls, who are audacious pizza eaters and are colonizing all the lagoon. So I was wondering, because they are not perceived as a local bird. There is not this identity thing going on for anyone living in town, but those who are activist or sensible, or just love this place, are happy to see them coming back, because they know that as visitors they can bring good things, while other species are arguably more damaging for the ecosystem. So I was wondering if there is anything about in your culture about migratory birds or invasive species, or I mean, can a visiting bird enter the mythology, or will it always be seen as something that was not from here? I mean, can mythology still be enriched with new things? Or
yeah, well, definitely there's always the regional birds, and like you said, the migratory birds. So I'm really just starting to learn a lot about the stories of other birds coming in, and I've recently started working with this Wild Bird Trust, which is part of the, it's located on the traditional lands of the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish people, and we work together as indigenous knowledge keepers with a group of very active settlers who are they're some of the people that actually discovered the hummingbird nests and stopped the pipeline with the knowledge of the hummingbird's nests. So we've been learning, because even some hummingbirds are not from here. The Anna's hummingbird lives around Vancouver area, and it stays there all year round. And the Rufous hummingbird migrates from the States, from Washington and Oregon up. And so those hummingbirds, there's only one that actually lives in Vancouver area in the Lower Mainland all year round, which is kind of phenomenal, really, when you know how tiny it is. And then it nests still in a cold month, so it really has to stay with its babies, because they're literally, the babies are like this big, like, you know, there's my finger, they're about this big, they're even probably my pinky nail. So if you can see my pinky nail, how tiny it is, that's probably how big the eggs are. And so then when they grow, they get to be about this big, and that's maybe the length of my finger. I don't have big hands either. It might look like it on the screen, but I actually, everybody always tells me, how with those little hands do you do all the gardening work you do? And I'm like, I just have to work harder. But yeah, and so we have different stories about different birds, and I'm still learning some of those, and I'm learning the different names of different birds. And one of them, interestingly enough, is one that I think migrates between Vancouver, Lower Mainland, maybe Washington State, and up into not necessarily as far north as Alaska, but it starts to go up the West Coast, and it's the common wren. And I found out recently that a song that I've been singing for almost a decade and a half, the Tum Tum Slolum. The Tum Tum Slolum means sacred song in our language. And the Tum Tum, I always wondered, what is this Tum Tum? And Tum Tum means winter or snow or snowbird, and it is the snowbird. So I guess it migrates into our Northern Territory, which is located between where the town of Squamish is now, and southwest of the towns of Whistler and Pemberton. So it goes into the Ilaho Valley and the Tantalus mountain range, and it goes there when it warms up. And when it arrives there, winter is now ending. So I was really excited to learn what that bird is, and how it has an indication of the change of season with our songs and with our celebrations. So I think there's always room for other creatures. And I think, you know, in the long ago, we didn't have so many invasive species around the world. And with human travel, birds have followed us, other creatures have followed us, and we do see negative impacts. And so this is where we really start to bring, that's where it becomes very important to bring indigenous plant species back into these riparian zones, because it enhances birds and pollinators to live and to continue their migrations through those areas. Yeah. I'm just going to get rid of, I have a notification for a virus. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's just letting me know it could happen because I'm online, but it's not, I just want to get rid of it.
Pietro, I think Pietro had another comment or question.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. But well, I just wanted to say that I also really like the idea of the seed bombing.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the services that birds produces to facilitate the repopulation of these plants, which well, here as well as in your places in each riparian zone, I guess, they risk to be wiped out by the increased speed of water, or by sudden floods that didn't used to happen in the same way as they do now. So that birds can often be, I mean, one, they do this for free. So we could also assess the economic efficiency of having them to seed bomb rather than having to do that through human labor, because that's an argument that often comes out, like how expensive it is to maintain an ecosystem, and what do we get back? I mean, from political power and administrators in general, like to see environmental protection as a financial burden rather than as something that is actually very good for everyone, birds or not. So to campaign for more bird run seed bombing would probably be good. I think it would look great on posters.
Yeah. I love that idea too. It's really awesome. Yeah. So should we go to the next section? I guess the third one. So I'm going to go. Again, if people realize they had a comment, you can bring it into the next one or at the very end. We're happy to do that. Okay. And there we go. And present. There we go. So yes, this is the second section. Oh, and it looks like it brought me back to that one, which is good. I might have used that twice. Oh, it might have been the last one. Okay, so healthy ecosystems equal healthy living species. So it's, I think, again, it's like a bit of a natural flow, this conversation, and how it's bringing us into this knowledge. This image is actually from a place that is known as Spolches. And Spolches was a shared village site of the Squamish and the Ulkamiqua speaking people of Mount Currie and Lytton and all of those small communities that we all border on each other. So Coast Salish and Interior Salish. And it was believed in the long ago, about 20,000 years ago, there was a massive volcano that erupted and wiped out the entire village. And so what resulted was a whole change of the landscape. And now 20,000 years later, you know, it changed the flow of this river that ended up flowing down, this waterfall that flows down into a lake that also has tributaries that eventually go down to Howe Sound. So yeah, it's also known in Canadian English terms as Brandywine Falls. And all along the highway, you can see remnants of the volcano from 20,000 years ago, and you find lava in many places surrounding this. And you can even see the rocks tell their own stories, but so do the trees and the lush environment. Those rocks are filled with life because of that river flowing. And so the key to maintaining a healthy ecosystem is to keep the environment surrounding the ecosystems clean. Water is life. Water cleanses everything. And it really is the reason we have to, it's very necessary to keep toxins away from the natural water, natural world, and especially away from all natural sources of water. Water does have the ability to clean toxins out of the ecosystems, but if there are excessive amounts, it will eventually kill everything surrounding those ecosystems, which come in contact with them, including the water itself. And water is transformative. We believe as Squamish people, we are the people of the clean water. And we believe that the water is our telephone to the ancestors, the ancestral world. And so because it is transformative, the healthy parts will evaporate and become other forms of itself. And just to note, not far upstream from this site, I mean, I just told you how it transformed 20,000 years ago and changed everything. But 20 years ago, there was a train that derailed about 10 or 15 kilometers up the road up the highway, which is part of this river system. And it derailed. It was filled with chemicals. And in a matter of moments, it destroyed 500,000 fish fry, that amongst them were 5 species of salmon that have never returned to those rivers. And so even, you know, close to 20 years later, we're still needing to look at remediating that site. And although things look healthy, many things have survived, but we have lost our biggest food source, which is the salmon. And then I was really focusing on the big picture. The big picture is mainly about the clouds, because the clouds are another form of water. But you can see below the trees, and that's from a a wildfire from about 5 years ago and the growth that is coming back since. So climate change is very much a part of Indigenous people's lives. It's whether we like it or not, we're surrounded by it. And that picture was taken last summer when I was out berry picking in a really hard to reach place. And but I was just blown away not only by the landscape and the resilience of the land, but, you know, just seeing way up in the mountains, far inland, the clouds, they are still very much a part of the environment. And it is a big part of how we see water and how it transforms and connects us all. And of course, this is the top right corner is actually from my windshield over the winter 2 winters ago. And I was just fascinated by the imagery that came up. It looks like feathers. It looks like a mountain. It looks like the skies. And ice is so powerful and transforming. It not only is another form of water, but it tells a story, and it tells, you know, the story of the land and the water together. And down below is a beautiful, like, it's basically a saltwater. It's like, it is an estuary, but that's mostly salt water there. And it was taken in Australia in Brisbane a few years ago when I was there, and just the incredible color of the water. And when we were looking down there, my friends and I, we later realized we saw something moving, and then it came up and it was a giant turtle. So it was really beautiful. Just again, that connection of the land and the water, but seeing it in its different forms, the clouds, the ice, the water, and how water has many personalities and many ways of existing. And I'm just going to see, I'm not sure if I meant to, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, and so that might have been left, there might have been a mix up there, but that's okay. I'll keep talking. And so here, the picture on the left is actually giant fungus, and they're just so amazing. And you can see the forest behind there. So that tree there, I believe it might be a hemlock or a fir. It's hard to tell because I didn't take pictures from above, but I can see from the bottom below. This is in a forest that was slated to be clear cut, and we've protected it since. Just this was last fall, but we managed to protect it. And those are wild blueberries in the background, those little plants, and right in the foreground there, and these giant fungus. And it's another way that we, you know, what's interesting is that water collects on those fungus, and bears walk by and lick those fungus. So they're actually, when they're going up this tremendously steep hill, they can actually stop even where there's no river, and they can lick the condensation off of those fungus and keep going. And, you know, and mushrooms really need the water to survive. And we see in the top corner, these little mushrooms coming up through vegetative matter of mostly cedar. And so many people think nothing grows in cedar, but here it is, the mycelium in action. And it's another plant that not only requires wet soil to live in, it requires shade and the right environment and decaying things to live off of. But it is part of what purifies. These fungus, mushrooms, lichens all purify the air and the environments they live in, and they build soil by living. And you can see in the bottom corner, this is actually in a really beautiful little riparian zone. It's hard to see on the left of that bottom left picture, or the bottom right picture, but in the trees on the left of that photo is the river flowing by. And these are called turkey tails, these little fungi. And they are very medicinal and used for lung, to strengthen your lungs, to heal from lung cancer and many things. And again, decaying they feast on a dead tree, and they will eventually turn that tree into rich soil, which will feed the trees, which feed off the river, that protect the river, and so on. And, you know, the living creatures surrounding those areas, the deer in the cedar grove here, and wandering through the beautiful little tiny green leaves that you see in the top right corner, and they're just living next to a piece of fungi. And those tiny little plants, they're maybe, if you make a circle with your middle finger and your thumb, they're about that big in total. They're quite tiny, but they are rare to find, and they're just treasures. And there's been a lot of stories I've heard associated with what we refer to as the little people. And I think everybody in the world has stories about little people. So it helps us connect and understand that that mythology, and, you know, how we're all connected. And then down here is up in the mountains, again, between where Mount Currie is and Lytton. So it's in this mountain range that changes from the ocean to kind of a timberland. And then as it, on the other side of those mountains in the picture, it starts to fade into what becomes a desert environment, a semi-desert, a pocket desert environment where there are rattlesnakes and sage. So the ecosystems change, but this is that halfway point between the ocean and the inland, and how, again, biodiversity plays a big part. And in the winter, that entire mountain is just packed with snow, and you can't even drive on that highway. So it's only accessible in the summer. But yeah, okay. I might have actually done something where in cutting this in half, it's a little confusing for me, but I will go into this one because my question directly relates to this part, which is glaciers, the rivers, which are the lifeline, the veins between the mountains and ocean, and how does traditional indigenous knowledge help us understand the ocean and the glaciers and how they're connected. And so this image is it's actually really close to, see this one here in the top corner, in the bottom corner. So that photo is taken about 20 kilometers on the other side of this glacier and mountain. So that was the previous picture I took was taken last summer. This was taken this winter. So you can see like the snowpack, the glaciers, and the snow sits up there for 6 months of the year. And I just wanted to really give a nice indicator of what that environment looks like. And then we look at the top corner there, and that is a really great, I actually took that when I was flying over the Rockies, so I could really show the mountains covered in snow. You can see down on the bottom, there's valleys on either side with river systems. The bottom corner there is in my home community, and on the left is Stanley Park. And this is a little spit of land that goes out, and you can see, when you're in Vancouver, you can go to the Lionsgate Bridge and see this site. So it really shows the estuary on the right side, and the left side is the mouth of the Burrard Inlet, and then out there is the big bay, and really shows that transition into the Salish Sea. And so when we look at these mountaintops and these tributaries, these rivers and watersheds that all eventually come down into the ocean and form that. And the big picture on the left is actually when I arrived in Montreal last week, and it was a whole water system that set up. So in the background there, on the other side of the bridge is the St. Lawrence River. And then this is a human-made water setup that brings all the water in there and flows around. Yeah, so there we go. going to go back to my thing here and take the screen sharing off. And I'm going to ask my question. How does traditional indigenous knowledge connect us all to the ocean and the glaciers, and how they are in their own ways connected?
Well, what I understand, I'm unmuted, yes. What I understand is that you reveal those connections. We haven't been, I mean, I'm not a British Columbia resident, but I'm sure that not a lot of people are aware of those interconnections. Why are the glaciers there? Why are the waterfalls there? What is what you said some, I don't know, 20 minutes ago about the lava rocks, which are still you know, found, and in the waterfall, it's clear that it's belonging to, or it has a volcanic origin. So you are telling those stories. I think you, as Indigenous peoples, you are important as storytellers, obviously, and you bring back the old knowledge. You are not interested in those modern maps to you know, to defract regions into their geopolitical or economic interests, but you tell the stories of what, well, the importance of the animals, the importance of the rivers, and why are rivers, or why the glaciers bring water through the rivers to the ocean, and why is it important to keep the forests healthy, because everything is related to this balance. When you were speaking about the fungus growing on the, well, on a tree, cedar tree or any other tree, I was wondering, here in Europe, once a tree has a fungus, the tree is cut.
Oh, wow.
And for me, this is terrifying. Everybody says that, oh, this tree has a fungus, they get marked and they get cut. And for me, I don't understand this, because now, and I learn it now from you very clearly, that a fungus on a tree has a purpose and has a specific function. So when those trees are dead, because of the fungus or not because of the fungus, whatever the reason is, the fungus grows and the fungus deteriorates the tree, and the tree becomes soil, and the healthy soil becomes water, and the water is flowing through the river to the ocean. All of this is interrelated, but these are the stories you are telling. So this is why Indigenous knowledge is important and has to be supported as well, that you can spread the word about this, because this is knowledge which you don't learn nowhere, not in our education at least. I don't know if I answered your question properly.
Yeah, very well. I loved it. Yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody else that feels like adding their part. If you can ask questions too, if you're not completely clear, so don't be shy. Yeah, and that forest with those big fungi, I mean, when those trees, it's really hard to get up there. It took me, even with, I have a really good off-road vehicle, and so I could get up there to that site, but I still had to walk in for an hour and a half to where that was with heavy camera gear. There was a crew of us, and we're actually working on some projects this summer that are all around protecting ancient forests and educating people about the forests. And a big part of it is the mycelium, the fungi networks, and lichens are a type of fungi. So they're all really intrinsic to the health and wellness of the forests.
And I think it's important to speak about that everywhere in the world. You have those challenging situations everywhere, specifically here in Sweden. There is a big discussion going on right now regarding the northern part of Sweden, which they call here Norrbotten, where the forest is actually, yeah, it's an economic good. And the interrelation of a healthy forest, not a constructed forest, because that's what's happening. They are cutting the old trees the
Yeah.
old forest, and they are regrowing new forests. But this is not the forest which a balanced biodiversity landscape or nature needs, also to keep the ocean and the river and everything related to water healthy. So this is an interesting discussion which we might also in the future continue with other indigenous artists in other parts of the world, to grow the conversation around this topic.
Yeah.
And Ingrid, she's asking a question. So what could be your recommendation to massively protect the glaciers?
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah, I think that we really, I mean, I'm looking at the reason that the glaciers are melting is like for people in BC, what we see is that if we keep taking down these the older trees, it's going to heat up the planet. And we recently saw this in the last week in Vancouver. From Vancouver, probably as far south as Oregon, up to Alaska, the waters warmed up. BC went through the biggest heat wave it's ever been through. And so we're feeling climate change more than ever. And apparently millions, probably billions of shellfish and other shoreline life was burnt and cooked on the shoreline, literally, and died in this last few days. And on top of it, so that mountain range, I was talking about, the town of Lytton is on the other side of that big meadow that I showed in the green picture. And that entire town burnt down a week ago today, burnt to the ground. And at the beginning of the day, they were showing a clip, an interview clip that had been done the day before with an elder, native elder living in the town of Lytton, because it was the hottest place in Canada. And at the end of that day, the town burnt to the ground. And there's speculation that it could have been caused by the brakes of the train that went through, and because the fire seemed to follow the canyon where the trains were going, and it was going into other towns, spreading. And we're still looking for people that were living there. So I've been like on the phone and on different types of messaging systems over the last week, trying to get messages out to people I know that live there and make sure they're okay. And I've been hearing back from people slowly, but they're in a place where there's not any cell range. Like when you travel through there, you can't call anybody. You'd have to essentially have what we call the VHF radio, the very high frequency radio. And so there's little towers all through there, but there's no cables. Like it's a dead zone. And so climate change is completely affecting the British Columbia, the whole province right now, more than ever. And it's a very direct result of basically clear cutting some of the last ancient forests in BC. And so we're getting closer and closer to the end, is how we feel. And how we can protect these areas is that as humans, we're going to have to go up and start planting the trees that are from that area up higher up in the hills, and that we really need to end logging altogether. Like it can't go on anymore. It's like the salmon, we can't eat. There's even an idea that now Indigenous people might not be able to even fish because our salmon stocks are so low. And I've said for years that if we stop for 5 or 10 years, we'll still have salmon in the future. But without stopping, we're wiping out every species of salmon and other seafood. And with logging, I think 240 people died in BC last week. And our premier, the elected premier, went on TV and said, well, it's a fact of life, people die, and you were all warned. that it would get hot. And he is actually the person allowing not only the logging, but he is sending militarized police into indigenous communities when we stand up and try to protect these forests from being wiped out. So we're fighting climate change, and our biggest enemy are the elected leadership, governments of Canada, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And on a side note, the RCMP were only formed in Canada due to the fact that they wanted to remove Indigenous children from communities. That's the only reason they were formed. And they've now become the most dangerous police force in Canada. And their sole purpose now is to enact the ongoing destruction of wild spaces. They're protecting fish farms that are poisoning the waters and killing sea life. They're protecting the LNG, the liquefied natural gas, the fracking industry, the oil industry, and
so actually, what you want to say is that all of this is really a political issue, like everywhere in the world, and which means that specifically in the countries where we still have indigenous communities, it's important to support indigenous standpoints, indigenous opinions, and listen to what you have to say instead of just shutting you off. So this is actually one of the reasons I want to do this as well, or I'm doing this, and we are working with Artport Making Waves on this topic in order to support you. And but of course, we are not a political organization. We are a hybrid arts environmental organization, and focus onto education. And this is why it's important that we have these kind of lessons where you can speak out to an international community about your knowledge. I don't know, did you have a last chapter maybe, so that we can go
I have one more chapter, and it's leaving us on a positive note. Because I feel like this section is not even intentionally heavy, but that's the truth. That's the heavy truth. So yeah, so I'd like to go to the next one, and then we can move on from there and have a discussion. Okay, and Chrome tab. And I'm really hoping that it's, here we go, share. Let's hope it's doing the right one. Okay, and there we go. So remediation as a tool for survival. How can people enact support for oceans and forests to be protected? And there you see me, happy me, working in a socially distant. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I still see the image of the eagle, the hummingbird, and the raven.
Oh, weird. That's strange. Oh, hold on. Maybe I will go back to here. Oh, yeah, I see that. Okay. Do this, and I'll do the screen. It probably went to the wrong screen. I probably... And I'm going to actually see if I'll share it. And no, I think I did it wrong again, but because
it was right. I saw you with a mask and remediation, etc. Was correct.
But is it gone now, or?
Now it's gone. I only see you and the other.
How about now? There, you see me now in the mask?
I think you need to restart the screen sharing.
Okay,
because it
sorry.
Was correct,
I thought so. I think I messed that up. Sorry.
No problem.
I guess it happens near the end. Share. Can you see me with the mask? Or is it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Whew. Oops. Okay. All right. So, oops, and it just hopped ahead. Okay. So there's me with my mask, and I'm carrying some indigenous plants, and there's cedars in the background. This is in a public park, but what we're doing is planning for the future and specifically for when the waters rise. So we're actually helping to reinstate a riparian zone and planting planting shrubs and berry plants and ferns and other plants that you find in the riparian zone. And you can only see the cedars behind me, but to the side there are several cottonwoods, and cottonwoods are a huge indicator of riparian zones. So this is a project that continues with the work I'm doing with Anne Riley, not just remediating through putting flowers that grow and decompose, but also reinstating actual ecosystems and rebuilding it. So it does kind of answer Ingrid's question, like how do we reverse things? We start to replant ecosystems that have disappeared, and wherever there's spaces that have been previously altered through human intervention for what we call development or progress, when buildings are torn down or sites are changed, if we start to put plants from that area back into the site, it will start to heal that earth and bring back birds and bees and bring that wellness back to the land. And so here on the corner is, on the big picture, is my colleague Anne Riley, and we're in our community garden there, and she's drilling holes to put mushroom spores in so that the trees can start to grow. These dead trees, these logs that we salvaged out of the forest, we took them and drilled holes in them and filled them up with mushroom spores and put them in the forest. And then on the right-hand side, that's the spot that I was just showing you, where in the first slide where I was. These are the cedars that we planted, and you can see the big canopy behind us of the giant cottonwood trees. And so as the waters start to rise in Vancouver, this is a piece of land that comes up on a hill, and the water will start to rise, and it will start to fill these areas like these parklands and reinstate those riparian zones on their own. The bottom picture is actually a picture from Hawaii of a similar project where the Hawaiian people went into different areas and they also believe that if they put indigenous plants back into areas, they'll wipe out the invasive species eventually, and that the Hawaiian people, the indigenous people, will have access to their plants. And this plant is called lauhala or pandana, and it's the leaves that are used for weaving, and they weave pretty much everything you see people weaving with in Hawaii and then several of the Polynesian islands. I found the same tree in different parts of Australia. So it really spans through Oceania countries and islands. And again, it's the same, that same site. There was just so much I could take from this. And so the big cedar stump in the middle on the left picture is, interestingly enough, a stump that was taken out of the Ilaho Valley, which is where I'm from. That's the northern part of my cultural land. So those two stumps you see there, the big fat ones, they have carvings in them. And about 20 plus years back, the first public art project I worked on with youth, and I got them connected to carvers in my community, and they created these stumps into carvings, and they were actually 3 human figures, and they were placed at Science World, which is a really popular place not too far from this site. And they were going to be removed, and they didn't know where to put them. And the lead artist from that project from several years back contacted me and asked if there was a place we could put them. So we asked them to be moved to this Cedar Mound site so they can start to decay. and feed the plant life that is on this site. So it takes a lot when you're remediating. It's not just about planting things, it's about helping to rebuild a whole ecosystem. So these cedar stumps that when we carved with them 20 years ago were removed from the Ilaho Valley. They were trees that were being falled, and they look like they're both from about 600 to 800-year-old cedar trees. So those are still baby cedars. They will triple in size and become much larger. And so even 20 plus years later, they're still intact. And they're only starting to decay because they were in a big open space with sun beating down on them. And they knew that they were going to deteriorate, and they would have had just a pile of decayed cedar to pull out of there. So we pulled them onto the site. They will continue to decay. They will feed the berries and other plants that are on the site, and they will eventually turn into dark, rich soil, which will feed it'll give nutrients back to that site. And on the subject of cedar, in the top right corner is a little ceremonial mound that people made over the course of the summer. We planted this in the fall, and then we had these cedar stumps arrive in early spring. And over the winter, some people, community members, made a circle with stones and with cedar boughs, and I think have been burning sage there, and just having a quiet place to feel connected to the earth. And our hope is that over the next, it's a legacy part of our big remediation project to show that it takes many things, like not just healing the earth through growing plants that extract the toxins, but to bring back places in the urban environment where we have berry plants and medicine plants, and a shady zone that starts to help that part of the city to heal and become a contemplative and reconnecting zone for indigenous people that live in the city. And then in the bottom right corner are my friends who are, the mother is Wet'suwet'en, and so she's very much grown up in the environment of fighting climate change and having to deal with oppressive governments. And her daughter is Wet'suwet'en, as well as from Mount Currie, so Uklamikwik. And so both of her parents have been very much land-based people. They're artists. My friend Jo, the mother, is a weaver, a cedar bark weaver. She's now carving with cedar, and we're working on interactive media projects. And they're there to help plant indigenous plants on the site and to reinstate an ecosystem and rebuild it. And so that's how we feel that through that work, it brings us all back to a place of healing. And this is my final slide, and it's a little canoe cape that is the warp, the part that's coming from top to bottom is cedar. That's red cedar bark. And then I wove a number of things into there, the wool to represent the mountain goats. Those little buttons are abalone buttons, which are from the ocean. And then the colors are like the sky at the top, and then it comes down, and then there's a place above the canoe there that looks like it's cedar, but it's actually coconut hull braided. And so I wove that in there. And then, of course, the canoe, the image of the canoe, and little red cedar paddles to represent the people paddling. And where at the tips of the paddles is another plant, and that's the one that we saw in the picture from the Hawaiian image I showed of the pandana leaf. So that's the pandana leaf dried and woven into the warp, and then ends with wool. And so this, I made this for a project where I went to Australia and then brought this show back to Vancouver, and it was to promote the knowledge of the Great Ocean and how canoe cultures have traveled many waters, and that is how my Hawaiian ancestors came to be in Vancouver and in British Columbia and several places along the Pacific Northwest coast, and how through our relationships with the ocean, our stories will always be linked, and many cultures have been combined. So I wanted to put elements of both of my bloodlines, the Kanaka Maoli and the Coast Salish materials, to really show how easily they work together and how they blend together to tell stories. So yeah, that is the end of that. And see if I can get back to here and stop sharing.
Can already see you.
Yeah, so that's the end of that. And my final question is, how can people enact support for ocean and forests to be supported?
Wow, that's a very good and very final question to this very intense lecture. I think the most important thing which I learned right now in the last 15, 20 minutes is the long-term thinking. That indigenous knowledge is based on long-term thinking, and that's what we all have to inhale. We cannot say, well, if I plant a tree, I'm not going to be alive anymore when this tree is big. But that doesn't matter. Our life doesn't matter. But if we plant something, if we sow something, then it's meant forever, and not only to happen during our lifetime. So I think we have to step out of our comfort box and out of our very limited horizon we have. It's our lives, it's maybe the life of our children, maybe of our grandchildren, if we have grandchildren like you. But I think we have to think in a longer term. And also what you showed through these big old cedar tree trunks, which you carved 20 years ago, which are still there, and now they are serving for a purpose to refeed the soil or the place which you are inhabiting, or not inhabiting, but replanting and reactivating. So this is beautiful. Instead of cutting the trunk into pieces and burn them in your chimney because it's so nice and romantic in winter, it's much better to use it in order to feed the natural environment. And I think this long-term thinking and this, how do you say that? Something which is feeding, that we always have to think about what we are doing. Is this feeding something, or is this destroying something? And we can take the decision, even if we are only like one tiny little spot or a tiny little drop in the ocean, but we all can contribute to something. And if we listen to people like you who are experts in this specific field, then we can learn and we can try to implement that also in our everyday lives. And not only us as normal citizens, but we can also try to get on board people who are decision makers. So I will think a little bit more, but maybe Pietro, since he turned on his camera, has something to contribute as well.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that was buzzing at the back of my mind through your whole lesson today, or presentation, or as you want to call it. That is the question of continuity or discontinuity, because I was thinking about my grandma, actually, who comes from a very highly specialized family in herbalism from the Lake of Como. And I was thinking about, what do I know? I miss many words in actual Italian, and my ecological knowledge is mostly very rooted in this tradition. So it's a dialect which is dying. And I was thinking about how there was a big discontinuity, because from my mother's generation to my grandmother's generation, the dialect was almost completely lost, because there was this very forced urbanization and disregard for the traditional knowledge that was somehow a lot more able to think long term, as Anne-Marie was saying. And there's another thing which is completely unrelated, that is political discourse in Venice, which is all about now about the continuity. You know, we have been doing like this since the 60s, and we have invested so much money to build a dam that is arguably damaging to the ecosystem. So now that we're at this point, why should we be discontinuous? No, so the discourse is that we invested so much in this that we can't afford to be discontinuous, which is something that in the 60s was completely disregarded. There was a big moment of seizure. And from a personal level, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that my grandmother's generation, she would not speak dialect to her sons and daughters, but she would to her grandsons and daughters, which is interesting. So it's almost as all this knowledge that has been kind of lost in the one generation in a very short amount of time compared to how much it took to cultivate it. Almost as somehow she changed her mind in her old age, and that she should speak her ancient language to her grandsons and daughters. And this is why many things that are impossible to translate in Italian are actually, I hope that we can keep them alive. So I guess that it's a question about discontinuity and long-term thinking, that how can we like make it visible that discontinuity in this moment is needed, because clearly we have been doing things in an unsustainable way. I really liked your more militant talk about what's happening in British Columbia and the horror for the words of the Prime Minister. So how can we claim the need for discontinuity in this time and disregard all these investments that were made that are arguably not for the best? Yeah. I hope this was understood.
Very clear. No, I really loved what you just shared, and it was reminding me that through the time that I've lived in Vancouver, I lived predominantly in the east side of Vancouver, and there are many Italian elders that came here like several decades ago. And I always know where they are when I'm walking down the street, because they have the most incredible gardens. And, you know, and I've struck up conversations with people where there's a language barrier, but we start talking, pointing at the plants, and we just start, like, I get people to open up in any language. I'm just like, I have to know about that plant. Tell me about that plant. And then we start talking, and then they're always amazed at what I know. And they're like, who are you and where are you from? I'm like, from here. What do you mean from here? We're all from here. I'm like, no. Where are you from? Oh, Italy, from a small town in the mountains. And they'll describe some place and say, oh, you wouldn't know it. And I'm like, it doesn't really matter, but you know a lot about medicines. They're like, yes. And everything in here has a purpose. And so it's all these elderly people that that have migrated to different places in the world. And yet they still carry that knowledge of the plants, and they do gardens every year. And I was in Ganawage, which is outside of Montreal. It's a big indigenous community there, the Mohawk people, one of their several communities, and all the elders there are gardening. So I think that there's a lot that translates between every culture, with people that work with the earth and they understand it. And the things that you're saying about ancient languages and the plants, all of those, the language of the plants and the language, our oldest language, are all connected to protecting the earth and fixing it. And I think there's a big movement now with a lot of younger people like yourselves and younger than you that are really interested in knowing how to put all that together. And I think there, you know, when I look at how some people like Jeremy Dutcher, who is this pianist, he's an amazing pianist. He's Mi'kmaq from the East Coast here. And he here he's a pianist, he plays the piano, but he studied all these wax cylinder recordings of music from his people, from, almost the point of contact. And he was so grateful these were recorded, and he was able to bring back songs that his people haven't sang in over 100 years, maybe 200 years. And so I think there's a lot to be said about that. This is again where that intersectionality of media arts and, land-based knowledge comes together, and it does really interconnect. And now he's composing these beautiful, beautiful pieces that he travels around the world and is sharing. And he's phenomenal. And he's learned some of his language from these wax recordings, and he's learned the songs and the stories. And now he's teaching young people in his communities. He's going to powwows, he plays on the drum, then he goes to big concert halls. And I saw him when I was in Sydney last year, and it was just like we had a moment where he's like, you, and I'm like, you. And I was like, oh my God, here I am in an audience, but I'm in the right spot where we could actually see each other. And we only know each other on social media, but we know that each other has that same path of taking this old knowledge and bringing it forward. And I think there are ways that we can, utilize what has been gathered about our people and to bring back languages. My people's language was down to 6 speakers as little as a few years ago, and it was going to die. It was going to go extinct. And so now 3 or 4 years later, there are about 500 plus speakers, and they're all young people, my daughter included, and my granddaughter and my niece, who live together and speak the language in conversation every day together. So, when you look at something that is that close to the edge of extinction and that can be brought back and reanimated, these are the stories of hope that we all really need to think about. And we need to, push ourselves to promote that, and to not be discouraged by what isn't there, but be encouraged by even the small amount of things that we can find. Because I know that I took a very tiny handful of Zapatista corn from a dear friend 10 years ago. And all these indigenous people have migrated up north from Mexico for so many intense political reasons, and they couldn't bring their food. And I took that handful of corn, and then over the years, every year I planted, I harvested and gave her some. And in the last harvest I did a few years ago, I think I had about 2 or 3 pounds of corn seed, and I gave it all to her, except it kept a small amount for myself. And then she took it to all these migrant farm workers in Northern Ontario and helped to bring their food back to them. And it by then had been hardened to this climate and could grow in colder climates. So, these are stories of resilience. Even that term, seeds of resistance, it is very much about taking even a small amount of knowledge and information and nurturing it, caring for it, and sharing that with others. And it will grow its own forest of knowledge and remediation and the legacy for the future.
This is so amazing. These 2 hours and almost 2.5 hours, I think this is really, it's impacting. It's like coming really from somebody inside. It's not theory. It's really pragmatic knowledge, and it's reactivating old knowledge and bringing it back to our times. And I think this is really an important contribution to the UN Ocean Decade, because it's not only talking about the technical part of how can we make the ocean healthy and strong and resilient again. It's really about old ancestral knowledge, which we have to respect and which we have to focus on again. Because with, you have your traditions and you have your knowledge, which you can use pragmatically on your land. And if more policymakers would listen to you, then I think it would be easier as well to restore and to create resilience, specifically on this this intersphere in between, or the place in between land and ocean, because that's where a lot of damage has been produced, but that's also where we can restore a lot. So I thank you so much. That was amazing. My head is like overloaded with information right now, but also with very good and positive feelings, because I see that we can create something. And even though we were a small group of participants, but I think this interaction is also important, and the contribution from other parts of the world, like the stories Pietro was talking about. It's fantastic, and Ingrid also with her insight. And so I thank you very much, also to the audience. And we are going to edit the recording a little bit, because at the beginning we have like some minutes which are not necessary. And then we upload it on YouTube and on the website. And I hope that we can do another lesson, maybe a little bit shorter, because it's exhausting also for you. You have to return now to your field work with the installation. But I think I learned a lot, and I think it is necessary that we produce more of those getting-togethers, and this is maybe also contributing to creating a whole movement. So thank you very much. Thank you to the audience as well. Thank you to the Ocean Decade and all the people involved in the organization. And hopefully see you all very soon.
Awesome. Yeah, as we say, quite mathat, which means we will see you again. We have no word for goodbye.
Wonderful. Bye-bye to everybody. Thank you.
See you soon.